Hey guys, welcome to the first section of Chapter 4. Chapter 4 is the organization of life, and Section 1 is ecosystems. Everything is connected. It's all about ecosystems. So let's take a look at what we have so far. And my video's in the way. But these are your objectives and key terms. You have an assignment that you'll be doing these. I just wanted to label them, list them here, so we can kind of get our heads around what we're going to be learning about. The first thing we're going to be learning about is how do you distinguish between biotic and abiotic factors, living versus non-living. The next thing we're going to talk about is how population differs from a species. We're going to go organize living things from a single organism all the way up to a biosphere, and then we're going to talk about how a population and a species are different from one another, and then we're going to talk about how the habitats where an organism lives is important to them. We're going to use these terms. We're going to use the term ecosystem. Let me get my pencil going. We're going to use the term ecosystem and biotic factor, abiotic factor, organism, species, population, community, and habitat. We're going to use these words to do our lesson. First off, we're going to define an ecosystem. What is an ecosystem? Ecosystems are communities of organisms plus their abiotic environments. So we're going to talk about the difference between biotic versus abiotic in just a second. But an ecosystem has every living thing in that area, in that ecosystem, plus the non-living things together, because water counts, rocks count, all of those things count. So an ecosystem has the living things plus the non-living things. We'll talk about that again in just a second. But ecosystems can be almost anything. You can have an oak forest is an ecosystem. You can have a coral reef, like in our picture at the very beginning, as a ecosystem. You could have a mountain lake. You can even have an abandoned parking lot. As long as there's grasses and stuff growing there, that can be an ecosystem. Okay, but the ecosystems don't have clear boundaries. If you can see in this picture here, the animals and the living things can go in between the land and the water and the land and the air, okay? And then if they needed to, they could go further off inland into different parts of the ecosystem. So there is no edge to there's no boundary to an ecosystem. They flow. Things can move from one end to the other. Like, think about especially small things like pollen. You can't tell pollen that it can't go into the next person's pasture. It can't go into the next person's field. The pollen can blow from one forest out into a field, and from a field out onto a lake. And then the soil would be washing from the stream to a lake, and then birds can migrate from one state to another state. There's no edge to an ecosystem. There's no walls to trim anybody in or hold anybody back. Now, the ecosystems are made up of 5 basic parts. All right. The energy that it takes to require everything, that's from the sun. The minerals and nutrients that everything gets their food from and their nutrition, the water, the oxygen, and the living organisms. All of those are part of an ecosystem. Now, if you'll look, these top 4, energy, mineral, nutrients, water, and oxygen, those are non-living things. Those are abiotic. The living organisms, that's the only biotic portion. The plants and rocks are components of the land ecosystems, while most of the energy from an ecosystem comes from the sun. And if one part of the ecosystem is destroyed or it changes, the entire thing will be affected. If you see this picture, if any one part of it got messed up, it would mess up the whole thing. All right, so I've used the terms biotic and abiotic a couple of times, but I haven't actually defined them yet. Here we go. So the biotic factors of an environment are the factors that are associated with or result from the activities of something living. That includes plants and animals. It includes dead organisms. Okay, just because something dies doesn't mean it's not biotic anymore. Anything that is alive or was once alive or is associated with a living thing, even something's poo, is considered biotic because it came from an organism, a living organism. The abiotic factors are not alive and were never alive and could never be alive. Okay, this is like the air, the water, the rocks, the temperature, the sun. All of those things are abiotic. Scientists now, so the tricky part is, if you think about biotic versus abiotic, the only tricky thing is soil. Soil has parts of both in it. There are abiotic portions where you have the rocks have ground down into sand. Okay, that's definitely abiotic, non-living. but you also have the dead leaves, the animal poo, the everything that's ground up into the soil that is living. So soil has both living and non-living components in it, but just about everything else you can divide neatly into the two piles. Now, once we've divided what's living and non-living, we're going to focus just on the living. Scientists can take the living organisms and divide them up from the very, very tiniest up to the biggest levels. And that's what we're going to cover next. But before we do that, we have these short little videos. These links should be active for you when you're opening this video, and if not, you can right click on it and it says open hyperlink. But these are four little videos to help you, three little videos, okay, to help you with the things we're talking about. There's not an assignment, there's no notes to do, not even facts, but if you watch these videos, they'll help with the explanations of the stuff we're doing in our notes. Now, this is what I'm talking about, how the scientists can divide living things from the smallest up to the largest scale. We can talk about, and you have or you will have in biology, a single atom, biology and physical science, an atom into a compound and a molecule, and from there up to a cell and tissues, organs, organ systems, and the whole organisms. For ecology, we start at the whole organism. Like right here in this picture, we have a wildebeest. All right, down here on the bottom. Okay, right here. A wildebeest. Let's say his name is Bob. Okay, this is Bob the wildebeest. All right, that's a single organism. Now, if you move up the next level, okay, this level is population. This is Bob, his cousins, his uncles, his brothers and sisters, his grandparents, and his nieces and nephews, all of these that live nearby him. That's the population. So you go from organism up to population. Okay, they have to live nearby. Okay. If they live anywhere in the whole world, you call that species. We'll talk about that in just a second. But population, they live nearby, and they can interact and interbreed with each other. That's population. So you have a single organism. A whole bunch of that same organism living together is a population. Now, the next level up is community. That's all the living things in that area. Plants, animals, and microbes like bugs, you know. Insects, yes, bugs, but I'm talking even bacteria, okay, and parameciums and amoebas and stuff. So all of the living things in that area makes up the community. That's the next level up right here. All right, now beyond that, if you add in the non-living things, okay, you add in the non-living things, like if this is like a savanna, so if you talk about the big rock where they introduced the new babies in the Lion King, right? Lion Pride Rock. That rock is an abiotic. The temperature, the watering hole, any kind of air and oxygen available, all of that abiotic. If you add the living things plus the non-living things, then you have graduated up to the level of ecosystem. Okay? So we start off with a single organism, that's organism. Then population is all of the same type of organism in an area. That's population. Community is all of the living things in that area. Ecosystem is living plus non-living things in that area. Then there's one here that's left off, biome. Okay, this is the biome of savanna. Okay, so that's biome. And then after the biome, you put everything together into the biosphere. So those are the levels of organization that we use. Let's talk about them some more with our notes. Okay, we start off with the level of organism. Okay, organisms are living things that can carry out their life processes independently. You have to have a whole body. You can carry out your whole life. Okay, that's a single organism. All right, you are an organism. So is an ant. An ivy plant. Remember, don't forget the plants. An ivy plant is an organism. A bacteria is an organism. Okay? It doesn't matter how big or small it is. It just means that it can carry out its whole life processes by itself. So that's an organism. And every single organism is a member of a species. This is where we get into a little bit weirdness, okay? Species are groups of organisms that are closely related genetically and can mate or reproduce or have the capability to mate or reproduce fertile offspring. The thing about a species is a species can exist anywhere on the whole earth. We used wildebeest, like Bob the wildebeest for an example. Okay, we know that wildebeest can live anywhere that the temperatures are right. Mostly it's Africa, but a single species is an organism that can live anywhere on the earth. That type of organism anywhere on the earth is a species. A population is that type of organism that lives nearby each other. That's where we get into some craziness, okay? The difference between species and population. Okay, so species can list is that type of organism anywhere on the earth. A population is that type of organism nearby one another. They live together nearby one another. Okay, so species is anywhere on the whole earth. Populations, they live right nearby each other. So both of them, though, are members of a single type of organism. Okay, species, that type of organism anywhere on the whole planet. Population, that type of organism living nearby. Okay, so the members of the species may not all live in the same place. This is where we get into that. Species is worldwide. Say that we've got some field mice who live in Maine. They don't interact with field mice in Texas. They're both field mice. They both belong to the same species, but they belong to different populations because there's no way that they could interact with one another. They're both field mice. They both belong to the same species, but they don't belong to the same population because they don't live nearby each other. Populations are the groups of organisms that live in a specific geographical area and they can interbreed because they're nearby. Species have the capability to interbreed, but they don't live close together. Only populations will actually do the interbreeding. And for example, the field mice in a cornfield make up a population of field mice. Okay, all the ones living in that particular cornfield. That's a population. They live together. Another important characteristic of the population is they will usually breed with one another, okay, rather than with members of other populations. So that's probably part of what keeps it together. For example, bison will usually mate with another member of the same herd. Okay, they're same population, the same herd. Just as wildflowers will populate other wildflowers in the same field. Okay, wildflowers will pollinate. That's what I tried to say. Wildflowers would pollinate with other members in the same field. Now, community is the next step up. Community is where we have every living thing in an area. All the living things. Communities are the groups of various species, all of them, that live in the same habitat and interact with each other. Every population is part of a community somehow, some way. And the most obvious difference between the communities is that you have different types of species in them. Okay, different types of species in the community. You can have every living thing. Land communities are often dominated by just a few species of plants, and these plants then will determine what organisms can live in that community. So depending on what plant you have, that will determine what kind of community you have. Depending on what plant you have, because plants are specific to their temperature, their water levels, okay? So different water levels, different temperature, you're going to get a different plant. And because you have a different plant, you have a whole different community. I have one of my videos who says plants are king. And they are. Plants are king when it comes to deciding what type of biome or community you have. Let's see. There we go. Habitats are the places where an organism usually lives. Every habitat has very specific characteristics that the organism needs to survive. DNA and evolution has determined that they match up almost exactly. Okay, DNA and evolution, which we'll talk about evolution, I think, in the next chapter. No, the next section. Okay, how they are specifically matched to their habitat. But if any factor changes in the whole habitat will change, and therefore the animal may need to change. We'll talk about that in the next section. If any part of the habitat changes, If any part of the factors, the characteristics, change in a habitat, the whole habitat might change, and therefore the animal might need to change. The organisms are very well suited to their habitats. We're going to talk about natural selection in the next section. In fact, the animals and plants usually can't survive very long away from their natural habitat. Once you take them out of their habitat, they're so perfectly attuned that most of them won't survive outside of it. This is a cute little song. This link should be active for you if you're viewing the whole PowerPoint, but if not, you can right-click and open. It's a cute little ecosystem song that helps with the information. A lot of us like to listen to songs to help learn things. These are the main ideas that we've covered today. So this is everything we've just covered. It's like a summary. The ecosystems are interconnected, okay, and they often interact in complex ways. They're related to each other, they interact. And an ecosystem is the community of all the different organisms that live in an area and their physical environment. Remember, community is just living things. If you add the non-living, then you've moved up to ecosystem. An ecosystem is going to contain those biotic, the living parts, and the non-living abiotic components. And the organisms are going to live as populations of one species in the community with other species. Every organism has its own habitat or type of place that it lives. Okay, so this is what we've talked about for the section 1. I think that's the end of our slides. So I'll see you again when we do section 2. All right, bye everybody.